You cannot delete a number from the sky. This is the single fact that the Chinese state has never been able to get around, no matter how much of the record it controls, and it is the reason this story exists at all. A government can take a web page down. It can pull a dataset offline, quietly change a figure, let a monitoring gauge go dark, stop publishing a statistic it would rather no one saw. These are easy things to do. The work of a few keystrokes in a server room, and they leave. At first glance, no trace, just an absence where a number used to be. But the water level behind the Three Gorges Dam is not only a number in a Chinese database. It is a physical thing, a surface of water sitting at a certain height above sea level, and that physical surface is being measured constantly. From orbit, by satellites that China does not own and cannot switch off, and their measurements are being copied into archives on servers scattered across the world, beyond the reach of any order to delete. So when a number vanishes from the official record, it does not actually vanish. Somewhere, a copy survives. And the story of the data China deleted about the Three Gorges Dam is really the story of the copies that survived it, and of what those copies reveal, not only about the dam, but about the act of hiding itself. Picture how this actually plays out for the people who watch the dam from the outside, because it is stranger and quieter than you might imagine. Somewhere far from China, a researcher sits at a computer, and part of her routine, for years now, has been to check the reservoir level of the Three Gorges Dam and note it down in her own file. She does not work for any government. She is one of a loose, scattered community of people, scientists and analysts and independent monitors, who have quietly appointed themselves the keepers of a record that they do not trust the source to keep. And one day, she notices something. A figure she had recorded, an official number from a previous flood season, does not match what the official source now shows for that same date. The record has changed. The number she copied at the time and the number displayed now are different. And only because she kept her own copy does she know it. She does not have to prove intent, or uncover a conspiracy, or break into anything. She simply has, in her own file, the version from before, sitting next to the version from after, and the gap between them speaks for itself. That is the whole mechanism of this story in miniature. One person keeping a copy. And the copy revealing not just a number, but a change, a hand reaching back into the record. Multiply her by the satellites overhead, and the datasets on 1,000 servers, and the archiving machines running day and night, and you have an outside world that has, almost without meaning to, made itself into a vast and redundant memory, holding on to everything the state might wish to revise. She is where this story lives, not in a leaked file, but in the patient habit of keeping a copy of the truth before anyone thinks to change it. Here is the thing about deleting data in the modern world that authoritarian systems keep learning and keep forgetting. For something small and obscure, deletion works. If a piece of information exists in only one place, controlled by one hand, that hand can erase it, and it is gone. But for something enormous, something the whole world is watching, something measured by instruments in space and studied by scientists on every continent and tracked by independent monitors and automatically archived by machines whose entire purpose is to remember, deletion becomes almost impossible. You are not trying to erase a single copy. You are trying to erase a fact that has already propagated into 100 independent archives, each held by someone you do not control, many of them in countries you cannot reach, some of them running automatically without any human deciding to preserve anything. And the Three Gorges Dam, the largest and most scrutinized piece of infrastructure on the planet, is about as far from small and obscure as it is possible to be. Its data is among the most watched, most copied, most independently measured information in the world, which means that the attempt to control it runs headlong into the one thing a state cannot censor: the physical reality of a giant lake sitting in the open under the eyes of the sky. So let us talk first about what gets deleted, because the deletion is real and it matters. Over the years, the public availability of detailed data about the Three Gorges Dam and its reservoir has been inconsistent, tightening and loosening, with certain streams of information becoming harder to obtain, certain gauges going quiet, certain datasets appearing and then disappearing, certain figures reported in some periods and withheld in others. During the most sensitive moments, the great floods when the reservoir climbs toward its limits and the releases downstream reach their most dangerous rates, the granular, real-time, fine-grained data about exactly how much water is coming in, exactly how much is going out, exactly how close the reservoir is to its ceiling, is precisely the data that becomes hardest to obtain in full, replaced by broad reassurances and selective figures. The structural data, the deformation and seepage measurements that would reveal the true condition of the wall, has never been openly published in detail at all. And beyond the dam itself, the broader environmental and hydrological datasets that independent researchers rely on to understand China's rivers have at times been restricted, access narrowed, numbers that were once obtainable becoming difficult or impossible to get through official channels. This is the deletion, and it is not a fantasy. It is the quiet, ongoing narrowing of what the state allows the public and the outside world to see about the most consequential structure it has ever built. An editing of the record that removes the inconvenient and leaves the reassuring. Why would a state bother to delete or withhold something as seemingly innocent as a water level? Because a water level, in the right context, is not innocent at all. During a flood, the precise reservoir level and the precise inflow and outflow figures are politically explosive, because they would let anyone with a calculator work out how close the dam is to being overwhelmed, whether the releases downstream are as controlled as the government claims, whether the reassurances match the arithmetic. A number that seems dry and technical can, in a crisis, expose a gap between what the state is saying and what the water is actually doing. And that gap is the single most dangerous thing a controlling government can allow to become visible. The structural numbers are sensitive for the same reason, because they would let outsiders judge the safety of the dam for themselves rather than trusting the official all clear. So the deletion is not paranoia or mere habit, though habit plays its part. It is a rational, if cynical, strategy, the removal from the public record of exactly those numbers that could be used to check the official story against reality, leaving the public with the version the state prefers and no independent way to verify it. Delete the numbers that could contradict you, and your version becomes the only version. That is the logic of the deletion, and on its own terms it would work, if not for the copies. But the logic of deletion contains a fatal assumption, and the assumption is that the state is the only one holding the data. That assumption was true for most of history, and it is the reason the instinct to delete runs so deep in systems like this one, because for centuries it worked. If you were the only keeper of a record, erasing your copy erased the record. The entire strategy of controlling truth by controlling the archive depends on being the sole archive. And a state that grew up in that world naturally reaches for deletion, expecting it to work the way it always did. What such a state fails to grasp until it is far too late is that it is no longer the only one holding the data, that for anything as large and as watched as the Three Gorges Dam, the data has already escaped into 100 other archives before the thought of deleting it even occurs. The deletion is aimed at a copy that is no longer the only copy, and so it strikes at nothing, erasing one record among many while the others look on, untouched. And so we come to the copies, the archives the state cannot reach, and the first and most important of them is the sky. Circling the Earth are satellites whose job is to measure the height of water surfaces from space, using radar that bounces off lakes and reservoirs and rivers and times the echo with extraordinary precision to determine the level of the water below. This technique, satellite radar altimetry, does not require permission. It does not care whether the country below wants its reservoirs measured. It simply passes overhead and records the height of the water, and it does this for reservoirs all over the world, including the great reservoirs of China, including the Three Gorges. There are programs run by foreign space agencies and research institutions whose explicit purpose is to monitor the water levels of the world's major lakes and reservoirs from orbit, and to publish the results openly, freely, for anyone to see. So while the official Chinese figure for the reservoir level might be delayed, or coarsened, or withheld during a sensitive period, a satellite passing overhead has already measured the true height of that water and fed it into an open database held on a server in another country, where it sits, uncensorable, a copy of the truth that China never controlled in the first place. And it is not only the height. Other satellites photograph the surface area of the reservoir, the extent of the water spreading up the drowned gorges. And from the area and the known shape of the valley, scientists can reconstruct the volume of water stored, independently, from imagery the state cannot suppress. The sky, in other words, is an archive that cannot be deleted, recording the physical reality of the reservoir day after day, whether China publishes its own numbers or not. It is worth understanding just how hard the sky is to fool, because the precision of these instruments is what makes them such an unanswerable witness. A radar altimeter on a satellite works by sending a pulse of radar down toward the water and measuring, with extraordinary accuracy, how long it takes to bounce back. And from that travel time, it calculates the height of the water surface to within a small number of centimeters, from hundreds of miles up in space. The satellite follows a fixed orbit that carries it over the same bodies of water again and again on a regular schedule, building up a time series of the water level that stretches across years, so that the record is not a single snapshot, but a continuous history of how the reservoir has risen and fallen. And this is only one of several independent ways the sky measures the same water. Optical and radar imaging satellites photograph the surface, mapping the exact extent of the reservoir as it floods up the gorges or draws down in the dry season. And because the shape of the drowned valley is known, that surface area can be converted into a volume of water stored. There are even satellites that measure the Earth's gravity field precisely enough to detect the sheer mass of water gathered in a region, so that the accumulation of tens of billions of tons of water behind a great dam registers, faintly but measurably, as a change in the local pull of gravity itself, water so heavy that space can feel it. Height, area, and mass, three completely independent physical measurements, all taken from orbit, all beyond any government's power to switch off, each one a separate witness to the same reservoir. To hide the truth from all of them at once, a state would have to alter physics, and physics does not accept edits. The second copy is the work of scientists, and it is more permanent than most people realize. Around the world, hydrologists and remote sensing researchers have made it their business to compile the data of the world's rivers and reservoirs into great public datasets, downloaded, cleaned, organized, and published for the use of the whole scientific community. There are datasets that gather the water levels and storage variations of hundreds of Chinese reservoirs, datasets that cover thousands of them, datasets that reconstruct decades of reservoir behavior across entire river basins from the satellite record. These are not held in China. They are published in international journals, mirrored on scientific data repositories on servers across many countries, downloaded and copied onto the hard drives of researchers everywhere, cited and built upon in study after study. Once a dataset like that is published, it is effectively immortal because it exists in too many independent copies to ever be recalled. The data about China's reservoirs, including the Three Gorges, has already been absorbed into this permanent, distributed, global scientific record, copied so many times and held in so many places that no authority on earth could ever gather it all back and delete it. Whatever China removes from its own systems, the scientists have, in effect, already made a backup. And the backup lives everywhere at once, beyond any single government's reach. The third copy is the humblest and in some ways the most quietly powerful, and it is simply the habit of independent people writing the numbers down. For decades, monitors and researchers and critics outside China and inside it have made a practice of capturing the official figures as they are published, copying the reservoir levels and the flow data into their own independent records, precisely because they anticipated that the official versions might not always remain available. There are long-running independent monitoring efforts that have tracked the Three Gorges reservoir's level over years, assembling their own continuous record from whatever the official sources released at the time. So that even if the state later changed or removed a figure, the independently captured version survives. There are public data trackers that copy the official water level into charts anyone can view. There are datasets posted on open platforms where enthusiasts and analysts have gathered the dam's water data into files that others can download freely. Each of these is a small act of preservation, a person or a group deciding to keep their own copy rather than trust the source to remain, and together they form a distributed web of independent records that makes the official data almost impossible to quietly revise, because the moment before the revision has already been captured and held by someone outside. To see how deliberate this preservation can be, consider the long-running independent efforts that have made the Three Gorges reservoir their specific subject. For many years, watchdog organizations and independent researchers outside the state's control have maintained their own running record of the reservoir's level, gathering the official figures as they appeared and assembling them into a continuous, independently held time series, explicitly because they anticipated that relying on the official source alone was unwise. These were not casual efforts. They were sustained projects, kept up across years, driven by the conviction that a structure of this consequence needed to be watched by someone other than the government that built it. When such a monitor records the reservoir level week after week, year after year, into its own archive, it is building exactly the kind of independent baseline that makes later concealment detectable. Because any future revision or gap in the official record can be measured against the continuous copy that was kept outside. This is the third copy at its most intentional, not an automatic snapshot or a scientific byproduct, but a conscious, ongoing act of civic memory, a decision by people beyond the state's reach to hold their own version of the truth about the dam precisely so that the state could never be the only one who held it. And the existence of these efforts, sustained over so many years, is itself a kind of verdict, an outside world that concluded long ago that the official record of this dam could not be trusted to remain complete, and that the only remedy was to keep copies of its own. The fourth copy runs without anyone even deciding to make it, and it may be the most elegant defeat of deletion ever devised. Across the internet, there are archiving systems whose entire purpose is to take automatic snapshots of web pages and preserve them exactly as they appeared at a given moment, storing those snapshots so that anyone can later go back and see what a page said on a particular day, even if the page has since been changed or deleted entirely. This means that when an official Chinese source publishes a reservoir level or a flow figure or a reassuring statement on a web page, there is a good chance that an archiving machine has quietly captured that page, timestamp and all, and preserved it. If the figure is later changed, if the statement is later softened, if the whole page is later taken down, the archived snapshot remains, showing precisely what was said and when. Deletion against this kind of automatic archiving becomes almost meaningless, because the act of publishing something on the open web is very often the act of creating a permanent record of it that the publisher cannot control. The state can change tomorrow's page, but it cannot change yesterday's snapshot, which sits in an archive it does not own, showing the world exactly what the record used to say before it was edited. We have already seen more than once how this plays out when the pressure is on, because the sensitive moments are exactly when the copies prove their worth. When images appeared some years ago that seemed to show the dam distorted, the state could dismiss the interpretation as a processing error, and it was, but notice that it could not prevent the imagery itself from existing, because the satellites had already photographed the structure and the pictures were already circulating beyond any Chinese control. The argument was about what the images meant, not about whether the world was allowed to have them, and that is the point, because the seeing had already happened. And during the Great Floods, when the granular official data on inflows and outflows and the exact reservoir level grew hardest to obtain in full, the outside world was not left blind, because the satellites went on measuring the water, and the independent trackers went on recording whatever was published, and the archiving machines went on capturing the pages. So that even in the moments when the official record was thinnest and most managed, a parallel record was being assembled from sources the state did not control. Each time the state has reached for the levers of concealment during a crisis, it is found that the levers no longer fully work, that the data it wished to keep vague had already been measured precisely by something overhead, that the figure it wished to soften had already been copied by someone watching, that the reality it wished to narrate had already been recorded by machines with no interest in the narrative. The copies do not wait for calm times to be made. They are made most intensely, precisely, when the state most wishes they were not. During the very crises when the truth is most sensitive and most worth preserving. And there is a bitter irony built into the whole effort, which is that the act of deleting often draws more attention and produces more copies than leaving the data alone ever would have. When a figure quietly sits in a database that few people look at, it attracts no particular notice. But when that figure is removed, when a page changes, or a gauge goes dark, or a dataset disappears at a sensitive moment, the removal itself becomes newsworthy, a signal that something was worth hiding, and it draws exactly the scrutiny the state was trying to avoid. Researchers who might never have downloaded a dataset rush to secure copies once they realize it may vanish. Monitors who might have checked a figure casually begin recording it obsessively once they see figures being altered. The attempt to erase, in other words, tends to backfire, converting a boring and ignored number into an object of intense interest, and multiplying the copies of the very thing the state wished to bury. This is a well-known trap. the way suppression advertises the thing it means to suppress, and closed systems fall into it again and again, because the instinct to delete is stronger than the wisdom to leave alone. Every deletion is a confession that something mattered, and in a watched world, a confession that something mattered is an invitation to go find and preserve it. Now here is where the copies become something more powerful than just a backup, because when you hold both the original and the deletion, you can see something the data alone could never show you. You can see the act of hiding. If you have an archived snapshot of what a page said last week, and you compare it to what the page says today, the difference between them, the edit, the removal, the quiet softening of a number becomes visible, and that difference is often more revealing than either version on its own. A figure that was published and then withdrawn tells you that someone decided it should not be seen. A statistic that was available and then restricted tells you that its availability had become inconvenient. A gauge that reported for years and then went dark at a sensitive moment tells you something by the timing of its silence. The copies, in other words, do not only preserve the data, they preserve the evidence of the concealment. The before and after that turns a simple absence into a documented act of hiding, and that is something no amount of deletion can erase once the copy exists. Because you cannot delete the fact that you deleted something when someone else was already watching. And the copies do something together that no single one of them could do alone, which is to check each other, so that the record they form is not just redundant, but self-verifying. If the satellite altimeter says the water reached a certain height, and the imaging satellite independently shows the surface spreading to the area that corresponds to that height, and the gravity measurement shows the mass of water that corresponds to that volume, and the independent tracker's copy of the official figure roughly agrees, then you do not merely have 4 copies of a number. You have 4 different physical methods run by different instruments and different institutions in different countries, converging on the same answer, which is about as close to unfalsifiable truth as the measurement of anything in the real world ever gets. And if one of them disagrees, if the official figure a tracker copied does not match what 3 independent instruments in orbit are showing, then that disagreement is itself a discovery, a flag that something in the official record does not match physical reality. This cross-checking is what turns a pile of copies into a genuine check on power, because it means the outside world is not dependent on any single source, not even its own satellites, but can triangulate the truth from multiple independent witnesses and catch the moment any one of them, including the official one, departs from the others. And every year this web grows denser as more satellites are launched, more datasets are published, more archives accumulate, more independent eyes turn toward the world's infrastructure, so that the ability to erase, already weak, grows weaker with every passing year, while the ability to preserve grows stronger. Time is not on the side of the deletion, it is on the side of the copies. This is why the state keeps losing this particular battle, and why it will keep losing it, no matter how sophisticated its controls become. The logic is almost mathematical. The more important a piece of data is, the more people and instruments are watching it, and the more independent copies of it therefore exist, which means the harder it is to delete. And the data about the Three Gorges Dam is among the most important, most watched infrastructure data in the world. It is impossible to make the largest reservoir on the planet invisible to the satellites that measure every major body of water on Earth. It is impossible to unpublish datasets that have already been downloaded onto thousands of computers in dozens of countries. It is impossible to recall the numbers that independent monitors have already copied into their own records, or to change the snapshots that archiving machines have already captured. The very scale and importance that make the dam's data worth hiding are the same scale and importance that make it impossible to hide, because they guarantee that too many eyes are already watching. Too many copies already made. A small, obscure secret can be kept. A secret the size of the Three Gorges Dam, sitting in the open under the eyes of the sky, cannot. But honesty requires admitting what the copies cannot see, because their power has a boundary, and the boundary is exactly where the state's most important secrets still live. The satellites can measure the height of the water, the extent of the flood, the mass of the reservoir, everything about the dam that is external and physical and exposed to the sky. What they cannot see is the inside of the wall. No orbiting instrument can read the seepage working through the foundation, or the water pressure building in the rock beneath the dam, or the fine internal deformation that the buried sensors record, or the true state of the concrete deep within the structure. Those measurements exist only inside the dam's own monitoring system. Taken by instruments embedded in the concrete and the bedrock, and they are the very measurements that would actually answer the question of whether the structure is sound. The copies preserve the external truth magnificently, and that is no small thing, but the internal truth, the vital signs of the wall itself, remains locked inside the operator's files, invisible to every satellite and beyond the reach of every archive. So the deletion still costs us something real, because there is a category of data about the dam that no outside instrument can reconstruct, that exists in only one place, controlled by one hand, exactly the kind of small, singular secret that a state can still successfully keep. The copies have defeated the deletion of everything the sky can see. They have not and cannot defeat the concealment of what only the buried sensors know, and that remaining darkness at the very heart of the structure is the one place where the old power to hide still holds. It is worth being honest about what the surviving copies actually show, because the truth matters more than the drama. For the most part, the independent satellite measurements and the outside datasets and the archived figures do not reveal some hidden catastrophe, some secret that shatters the official story. Mostly, they show a reservoir behaving roughly the way you would expect, rising and falling with the seasons and the floods, broadly consistent with the general picture the official sources paint. The value of the copies, in the ordinary run of things, is not that they expose a lie, but that they make it possible to check, that they give the outside world an independent measurement to hold up against the official one, so that the official one can be trusted a little more when they match, and questioned when they do not. That capability, the simple ability to verify, is precious in itself, and it exists only because of the copies. But there is a deeper significance too, and it is a sobering one. The fact that the outside world has had to build this whole apparatus of satellites and datasets and independent trackers and archives in order to know the truth about the dam is itself the story, because it means that the public's knowledge of one of the structures its own government is proudest of now depends on foreign instruments and outside archives rather than on any honest, complete disclosure from the state that built it. We know what we know about the Three Gorges Dam, not because China told us, but because we found ways to measure it ourselves and to keep our own copies. Precisely because we learned we could not rely on the source. There is a larger truth here, one that reaches far beyond a single dam, about the age we now live in and what it means for any power that tries to control what people are allowed to know. For most of history, a determined state could genuinely erase a fact, because facts lived in a small number of physical places, in documents and ledgers and the memories of people who could be silenced. And if you controlled those places, you controlled the fact. that world is ending. We now live in an age of ubiquitous, automatic, distributed measurement and memory, in which the important facts about the physical world are recorded constantly by instruments no single power controls, copied automatically into archives that span the globe, held redundantly in so many independent hands that the old techniques of erasure simply do not scale to them anymore. A state can still control a story, shape a narrative, dominate what most of its people casually see. But the underlying physical facts, the height of a reservoir, the extent of a flood, the movement of a structure, the mass of impounded water, have slipped beyond its power to erase because they are being measured and copied by a world that no longer needs its permission to look. The Three Gorges Dam is simply one of the clearest examples of this shift, because it is so large and so watched that the failure of deletion is especially stark. But the lesson generalizes to every closed power that would prefer its infrastructure. Its emissions, its military movements, its environmental damage to remain unseen. The instruments are overhead now, the archives are running, the copies are being made, and the age in which the powerful could simply erase an inconvenient physical truth is passing quietly into history, replaced by an age in which the truth about anything big enough to matter is almost always being recorded somewhere the powerful cannot reach. And that brings us to the quiet, permanent tension at the heart of all this. The reason the copies matter not just as a historical curiosity, but as an ongoing safeguard. Somewhere, right now, a satellite is passing over the Three Gorges Reservoir and measuring the height of its water, and feeding that measurement into an open database that China cannot touch. Somewhere, right now, a researcher is downloading a dataset of Chinese reservoir levels onto a computer in another country, making one more permanent copy. Somewhere, right now, an archiving machine is capturing a snapshot of an official page, preserving today's version against tomorrow's edits. This is happening continuously, automatically, beyond the state's control. And it means that the true behavior of the dam is being recorded independently and redundantly every single day, no matter what the official record says. And the significance of that is this. On the day that it matters most, the day, if it ever comes, when the official number and the real number diverge, when the state says the reservoir is at one level and the water is actually at another, when a problem is developing that the official record is being edited to conceal, the copies will be how the world finds out. The satellites will show the true height. The datasets will show the true trend. The archives will show what was said before and what was changed. The independent record, assembled from everything the state could not delete, will stand as the check against the official one. And the gap between them, if it ever opens, will be visible to anyone who cares to look, because the copies survived. And it is worth honoring the human choice underneath all the machinery, because the satellites and the archives would mean far less without the people who decided the copies were worth keeping. Behind every independent record is a person who chose to make it, a researcher who decided to download the dataset one more time, a monitor who decided to write the figure down before it could change, an engineer who built the archiving machine, a scientist who fought to publish the data openly rather than let it stay locked away. None of this happens on its own. It happens because, scattered across the world, there are people who believe that the truth about something this consequential should not belong to a single government, that the public has a right to an independent record, that keeping a copy is a small act of resistance against the erasure of reality. They are not spies or activists, for the most part. They are ordinary professionals doing careful, patient, often tedious work, checking a level, saving a file, running a scan, and in doing so building collectively a memory that no state can command. It is easy to focus on the instruments, the satellites, and the servers, but the instruments only matter because people chose to point them at the truth and to keep what they found. The copies survived because someone cared enough to make them, and that caring, spread thin across a whole world of quiet keepers of the record, is the real reason the data China deleted is not gone. So when you hear that China deleted data about the Three Gorges Dam, do not picture the truth vanishing into a void. Picture the opposite. Picture a number being quietly removed from an official database, and in the same moment, unreachable by the hand doing the deleting. A satellite recording the same truth from orbit, a dataset preserving it on a server in another country. An archive snapshotting the page before it changed, an independent monitor writing the figure down. Picture the deletion and the copy happening almost simultaneously, the state erasing with one hand while the world, without even trying very hard, preserves with 1,000 others. The data China deleted about its greatest dam did not disappear, because in the modern world, a thing that large and that watched cannot be made to disappear. It was copied, and the copies survived, and they are surviving still, accumulating day by day into an independent record of the truth that no government owns and no order can erase. The state can control what it says about the dam. It cannot control the sky that measures it, the scientists who archive it, the machines that remember it, or the simple, stubborn fact that once a truth this big has been seen, it has already been copied, and once it has been copied, it can never fully be deleted again.